Hello, welcome to my first YouTube video. I'm planning on making these pink seals today, except they're going to have wings, they're going to be cute, and they're going to be shiny. First, we're going to start with some rubbing alcohol to clean our clay and our space. Then I'm going to clean my hands with some hand sanitizer to try and get as much dirt off as I can. Here I'm rubbing down my space with the rubbing alcohol I mentioned earlier. This will be important to do throughout different steps of the clay process. Here is the weighing device that I use to measure out my clay so they're roughly the same size. I like to have them about 6 to 7 grams, so I'll stop at about 6.5 when I'm measuring out the weight. I like to start off by cutting them off into sections, and then I can go in and add and subtract clay as I go along to get my final amount. I repeat this process 17 to 18 times because I like to have 10 to sell, 5 to keep, and 2 or 3 for myself and my family. But I also usually mess up quite a bit, so that's why I like to have 5 to keep just in case. Now that that's finished, I go in with a scrap piece of clay and roll it around in my hands to try and get any extra lint off before I go in and roll the seals into a spherical shape. Once I do that, I closely assess my clay shape to see if there's any dust left in there, and if there is, I just go in with a Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol and I clean it up in spherical motions or in a motion. And with the power of editing, it's all finished. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's good to go in at different parts of your process and clean up your space so it's nice and neat for you to continue. Now I'm going to use the same colored clay as the body for the tail and the fins. I like to make sure that my clay is nice and conditioned and then roll it out into a cylindrical piece so it's easy to chop up small pieces for the tail and the fins. I often use this Sculpey bakeable adhesive for my pieces to reinforce the tail to the body of the seal so it doesn't get knocked off while I'm moving them around. But I also use this to secure the decorations on top of the seals. For the tails, I roll them into little teardrop shapes and add them together, kind of similar to a love heart, and it makes them look like a little bunny once I add them on. But for this one, I think I did it a little bit too wide. I usually like to have them a little bit thinner, closer to the body of the seals, so we're gonna try again. And here's the second shape. There's a little bit of a difference. I like it, but it's not really that noticeable, but that's okay. The first one's usually a bit of a prototype anyways, so it's okay to make mistakes. That's all part of the learning process. Now that the seal tails are finished, it's time for the fins. Since they're so small, the process of making the fins and tails are a little bit more tedious and time consuming because my weigher doesn't pick up on how much clay there is. So it's a lot of eyeballing and adding on and taking off the smallest pieces of clay so I get the right amount. And with a little bit of magic, it's all done. Here's a close-up of the cutie pies, well, a little bit of a blob so far. But the next step is adding the little face, which kind of makes them look a little bit weird, but it all comes together in the end. For the face, I'm using a little bit of a darker pink than the body, so it stands out. Making the seal's eyebrows and snout is similar to making the fins and tail for the seals, which is why this process of making the seal's bodies is probably the most time consuming and tedious, for me at least. It can be peaceful, but it is also a lot of making really small things and eyeballing it, which isn't really my forte, and I really admire miniature artists who are able to do so. Anyways, here's what they look like all together. This is what I meant by when I said they look a little bit weird, but it's okay, they'll turn out cute. So it's time to add the wings, but first I have to add another detail to the body, which is pan pastels, which is, you can use any pastels really. This is a shimmery pink one that I'm going to use just to add a little bit of sparkle to their body and their wings. Although I usually am clumsy, I have to remember to be really delicate with these seals so they don't break on me. Even though I did add the liquid bakeable adhesive, they're still quite fragile, so it's a lot of delicate tapping and patting And now that they're all nice and shimmery, it's time to move on to the wings. Now this process was a bit stressful, to be completely fair. I had no idea what I was doing. So this was actually the first time I used this Cernit clay. I did use one of the green translucent clays to prototype some frogs before, but this for some reason was a lot more tougher, so I used this clay softener also from Sculpey in hopes that it would soften the clay a little bit for me to use, which it did, but it also made it quite tacky, so I had to use some cornstarch to help relieve some of that tackiness. So here you can see that the clay breaks off, which I thought was because that it wasn't conditioned well enough, but it turns out that that's just how the clay kind of is, which is fine when you're making things that don't require you to roll it out, I suppose. Tried rolling it out again and it didn't work, so I decided to add my soft clay to it, which is Sculpey 3 translucent. And that meant that I had to condition it again, which gave me a little bit of trouble because of the two different types of textures that the clays were, but it's okay, it worked. And then I tried using my cutters that I was planning on having for the wings, but that didn't work out for me either, because for some reason the clay decided to adhere to the cutters itself, and because the cutters were so detailed it was hard to get it off in one piece. So I decided to scrap that idea and go for love heart shaped wings. But before I decided to use the heart cutters, I thought I'd give it one more try with this souffle clay, because I thought that the first problem might have been that the clay was too hard, and then the second problem that it might have been too soft. So I decided to go with the third solution, which was just in the middle, which is souffle clay from Sculpey. But that didn't end up working either because it just adhered to the cutters even though I used cornstarch, which is okay, problems happen. It just meant that the heart cutters would be the best solution for this project. So after I finished cutting out some hearts, I decided not to go the whole way and cut out everything I needed just because I wanted to prototype it first. So I used the liquid bakeable adhesive to adhere the wings to the seals. And then I thought maybe some silver might give that extra pop that I was looking for, but it didn't really work out well with the pink clay. So I tried it with the pink shimmer that I did on the seals' bodies, and that turned out a lot better, but I still wasn't too keen on the pink colour for the wings. Nonetheless, I felt it was better to see it through rather than stop halfway, so I decided to place them on the seals' bodies to see how it would look either apart or together, just moving it around, seeing how it felt. Especially because these are prototypes, it's good to just play around with it a little bit. And this is how it looked at the end, but I wasn't too much of a fan of the all pink look, I think it was. I think it just kind of washed out the seal's colours, so I decided to move on to the translucent clay again. So this is just me following the same steps as before. Then I added some pink shimmer onto the wings, just so it connected with the colours on the back of the seals, so it kind of looked like the wings were sprouting out of them. Plus I think it would look really nice to have it shimmer on the translucent effect that the clay has. I wanted to see if smaller hearts would suit the shape of the seals better, so I made some of those and made another mock-up just to see how it would look. So at this point I've had quite a few prototypes, but that's okay, remember we made extras. Because they're mock-ups and the ones I'm gonna keep, I ended up scrapping the pink look and followed through with 2 translucent prototypes. After debating which ones looked better, I ended up settling for the smaller wings, but then a new problem arose whether or not I liked them separate or whether I liked them together, and whether or not having them together would affect where the eye pin placement was, so I made another mock-up. After more deliberating, I ended up choosing the wings that were more closer together. I think they just felt a little bit more round and cute, to me at least. And with a little bit more magic, they're done. Except I still have to add the eye pins, so let's get on to that. I'm using a generic jewelry cutter to cut the eye pins so they don't peek through the bottom of the seals. And I'm going to use the liquid bakeable adhesive to make sure the eye pins are extra secure. This is a bit of a delicate job because the wings are still quite fragile and I need to place the eye pin in right in the center because that way the seals would be balanced when they're on their keychains. So it was a bit of a delicate job for sure. And here's how the batch looks before they're off to the oven. Once it's baked, it's time to do the faces and the booty. For this, I'm going to be using a Unipen, and a Posca. So this process is pretty slow because I want to make sure that the faces are pretty even, but it's super worth it with how cute they are. And if I mess up, I can always use a cotton swab in water or rubbing alcohol. This is how the cute faces turn out before the whites of the eyes. At this part of the process, it's also good to notice any dust or lint that got stuck in the clay after it was baked. And you can just use rubbing alcohol, or later down the line you'll see that I use a little drill almost to drill off the pieces. You can use a nail drill or a nail filer or sandpaper. There's many different options. I like to do the eyes first because then I give myself enough time for them to dry before I can move on to the whites of the eyes. Just then you'll notice that I was rubbing off extra Posca onto a paper towel just so it doesn't flood when I put it onto my seals. The next stage of the process is to resin the crafts. Again, I'm pouring out some rubbing alcohol just so I can clean my tools. I'm going to grab this little silicone container that I use to put my resin in. And of course a UV lamp will be very helpful when I'm using UV resin. I use this brush that's a little bit scrappy, but I love it nonetheless, and I clean it using the rubbing alcohol. These are the resins that I use. One is from an Australian brand named Poethin, and the other is from J. Diction that I got on Amazon. Poethin is a thicker viscosity resin, which basically just means that its consistency is a little bit thicker, while J. Diction is a thinner viscosity resin, and what I like to do is mix them together so I get a nice medium viscosity. And since most resins are toxic, it's important to wear protection while using it. The first part of the process is to resin the bottom of the seals and use the top part of the seals to hold it. Then I switch over to resining the top of the seals while I hold on using the bottom. This is the tool I mentioned before that I use to sand down any imperfections, or when I find any lint or dust in the clay. I go very slowly and I use it on the lowest setting. I got mine from Bunnings, but I'm sure you can find them on Amazon. Then I just make sure to dust it off and then I can get to resining. Another tool I often use while resining is a lighter because it pops air bubbles, but make sure that you're careful and that you do it very slowly. This is just a makeshift cover I have for my UV lamp to try and keep the rays inside. Here I'm going to be resining the top of my crafts while using a jewelry plier to hold the eye pin so my hands don't get any resin on them. As the last step, I'm going to resin the wings very gently and hope that this acts as a little bit more extra security so they don't fall off. Here is some footage that I got of the glowing baby sunbathing. And now that the base of the seal is done, it's time to take some photos. I'm currently using my new camera called the Sony ZV-E10, and I love it very, very much. And here's how it looks before I add the keychain accessory. And now it's on to picking out which beads suit these cute little fairy seals. I'm using some jewelry supplies including a one-step looper, pliers, and this jewelry making ring. I'm not too sure what it's called, sorry. These are just some of the beads in my big bead collection, but they're very cute and I definitely think they would suit the theme. This part of the process is super fun, but it's also a little bit difficult because I'm super indecisive. Some necessary tools in the jewelry making process is some eye pins and some jump rings. I have no idea which beads to pick, so it's all just a bunch of trial and error usually. This is the first design that I thought I would like, and then I decided I would make it a little bit more of an open flower while still keeping the little flower bead at the bottom, but I thought it looked a bit too cluttered, so I moved over to a simple pearl bead. And this is me, very confused. But after comparing them, I felt that the pearl looking bead was a little bit more dainty and pretty, so I ended up going with that. Here's some pretty bead soup, but unfortunately the audio was muted, so it's just silent bead soup. Then it's time to move on to attaching the beads to the seals, which is a very delicate process because you don't want to pull up the eye pin, and it's a bit easier with the wings wider open, but because I went with the smaller wings, it was a lot more delicate. These are the clasps that I ended up using. I have heart ones and I have star ones, but I think I was running out of them, so I ended up going with these basic ones. And after some fidgeting and some delicate maneuvering, I end up with this cutie. I like to start off with a prototype so I can get used to the process of adding the beads to the seals. And once that's done, we have a cute finished seal. And here's the last magic for the video. We have a bunch of them and then they're finished. Yippee! Thank you so much for watching. This has been Starlet Tea Studios, or you can call me Maddie. Bye bye!